The rain stains the glass of Café Vitali, turning neon into watercolor. A woman, drenched, trembling, sits alone with a journal pressed to her chest, as if it's the only thing keeping her alive. Behind the counter, Lorenzo De Luca lifts his gaze from an untouched espresso cup. He has seen countless faces pass through this cafe, deal-makers, liars, lovers, but hers holds something different. There's a quiet ache in the way she looks out at the storm, a fragility that disarms him before he even understands why. "Bring her to me," he murmurs, the words leaving his lips like an instinct, not a command. And in that moment, the night shifts, 4 words binding 2 strangers to a fate neither of them saw coming, a fate that will test the limits of love, loyalty, and redemption. Before you continue this story, like, subscribe, and share. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you've made it this far, type, "I'm still here." Let's see who's watching. Lorenzo De Luca had learned early that silence could build empires. The men who raised him taught that a calm tone could kill faster than a gun, that a smile could buy loyalty where bullets only bought revenge. He was the son of Don Matteo De Luca, and in his father's world, kindness was a myth told to children who hadn't yet learned what power cost. By 36, Lorenzo owned restaurants, clubs, a shipping company, and a small Italian cafe on Mulberry Street where the smell of coffee masked the scent of fear. To customers, he was the picture of discipline, pressed shirts, silver cufflinks, a voice soft enough to pass for charm. But those who knew his last name understood that civility was camouflage. His nights belonged to ledgers filled with debts and favors, his mornings to black coffee and guilt. He lived in numbers and rules because feelings had once betrayed him. Years earlier, he had loved a woman his family ordered gone. The memory of her body in the rain still lived somewhere beneath his ribs, and every time thunder rolled over the city, he heard the echo of her final breath. His father had told him grief was weakness, so Lorenzo turned it into ritual. Wake before dawn. Review shipments. Track payments. No distractions. But the emptiness kept widening. Sometimes he stared at the wall clock and imagined what it might feel like to live a life where time wasn't currency. When his employees laughed, he listened from the back office, studying the sound as if it were a foreign language he once spoke but forgot. The cafe had become his church of pretense, each espresso poured like confession. Every smile at a customer was an apology he'd never make to the people buried under his family's empire. Across the city, Amara Bennett was learning a different kind of silence, the kind that follows tragedy. 5 years earlier, a hit-and-run had taken her younger brother, Noah, on a rainy highway outside Richmond, Virginia. The police report said the driver was never found, though the tire tracks belonged to an expensive European car. Her mother drank herself into numbness. Her father left town. Amara packed a single suitcase and moved to New York, telling herself distance would dull the ache. She worked double shifts at a small clinic near the East River, patching up strangers while ignoring the bruises inside her own chest. People liked her gentle voice, the way she remembered patients by name, the quiet faith that still flickered in her when logic said it shouldn't. On nights when the loneliness pressed too hard, she wrote letters to her brother, folded them neatly, placed them in a box she kept under her bed. She wrote about the city lights, about the way grief sometimes disguised itself as routine. She wrote about forgiveness, but never sent it anywhere. Her apartment was small, 1 bedroom, peeling wallpaper, a view of an alley. She found comfort in simple rituals. Feeding the stray cat that waited outside her window, listening to late-night radio, lighting a candle before bed. To the world, she seemed fragile, but her resilience was quiet steel. The accident had stolen her brother, but sharpened her empathy. She felt other people's pain as if her nerves had been rewired. She avoided confrontation, yet when injustice brushed too close, something fierce stirred beneath her calm. Patients trusted her because she listened without judgment. She'd tell them, pain changes shape, but it doesn't last forever, though she wasn't sure she believed it. One evening after her shift, she walked home beneath heavy rain, her umbrella useless against the wind. The city around her was a blur of taxis and horns, the kind of chaos that made loneliness louder. On Mulberry Street, she paused beneath a flickering sign, Café Vitali. The warm glow through the window looked like refuge. She stepped inside, shaking water from her coat, unaware that the man behind the counter was watching her like a ghost from his past. That night would become legend in his mind, but for now, they were two strangers orbiting the same grief, without knowing it. Lorenzo had seen thousands of faces cross that threshold, yet hers unsettled him. There was no glamour in her, no performance. Just exhaustion wrapped in grace. The way she brushed wet hair from her face reminded him of innocence he thought the world had buried. He wanted to look away, but something deeper, memory, guilt, fate, refused to let him. To distract himself, he asked his barista a question he already knew the answer to. Who is she? The young man shrugged. Just came in from the rain. Looks like she needs a warm drink. Lorenzo nodded slowly, a command forming behind his calm. Bring her a cappuccino. On the house. As the barista moved, Lorenzo's oldest associate, Franco, leaned against the counter. You're generous tonight. Lorenzo's expression didn't shift. Some storms deserve kindness. Franco laughed softly. Or trouble. You decide which. Lorenzo's eyes flicked toward the woman again. Trouble usually wears diamonds. She wears sorrow. Amara took the cup with a polite smile, unaware of the conversation her presence had ignited. She sipped, eyes closing for a moment at the taste, warmth spreading through the chill. When she left, she placed a small folded note under the cup. Thank you. Lorenzo found it after closing. The handwriting was delicate, the ink slightly smudged from rain. He stared at the two words longer than he should have, wondering when gratitude had started to feel like temptation. That night, he couldn't sleep. The sound of rain against the windows dragged him backward into memories he'd buried. The woman his father ordered killed, the one who'd said before she died, "You'll forget me by the next storm." But he hadn't. And now this stranger's eyes carried the same quiet challenge. He poured himself another drink, muttering, "You're imagining ghosts." Yet even as he said it, he knew ghosts were all he had left. Days passed, but her face stayed. He caught himself scanning the door during morning rushes, half hoping, half dreading she'd return. When she finally did, 2 weeks later, he felt the air change again. She ordered tea this time, sat by the window, opened her journal. From behind the counter, he noticed small details. The worn edges of the notebook, the way she rubbed her thumb over the spine when she was thinking. He told himself it was harmless curiosity, but curiosity in his world had always been the prelude to ruin. Across the street, in a black car, 2 of his men waited, part of the routine security that came with his name. One of them, Enzo, noticed where his boss's attention lingered. "You see that?" he said to the other. "He's watching her like she's a job." The other man frowned. "Maybe she is." They laughed quietly, unaware how right and wrong they both were. Inside, Lorenzo approached her table under the guise of routine. "How's the tea?" he asked. She looked up, surprised by the gentleness in his tone. "Perfect temperature," she said. "That's rare in this city." He nodded. Some things still deserve care. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just uncertain. "You're new to the neighborhood," he added. "I see faces. I remember them." She smiled faintly. "Then you'll remember a tired nurse who's probably here too much." He tilted his head. "There are worse addictions." The brief exchange ended with polite warmth, but for Lorenzo, it felt like crossing a line. Later, in his office upstairs, he replayed the moment, realizing how foreign it felt to speak without calculation. When Franco entered with the evening's receipts, he found Lorenzo staring out the window. "You're thinking again," Franco said. "That's dangerous." Lorenzo answered without turning. "Maybe thinking is all I have left that's mine." Franco sighed. "Careful. Your father notices everything, especially when you start acting human." Meanwhile, Amara walked home through the drizzle, unaware that 2 men followed from a distance, not to harm, but to protect on Lorenzo's quiet orders. She sensed nothing unusual, only a strange comfort she couldn't explain. That night she wrote another letter to her brother. "I met someone today. Not really met but spoke. He looked at me like he saw the person I used to be before everything broke. I don't know why that scares me. She folded the letter and placed it with the others, whispering, "If you can hear me, tell me if I'm making a mistake." In another part of the city, Don Matteo de Luca sat in a leather chair, reading reports. "Your son's attention is slipping," a lieutenant told him. Matteo's lips thinned. "Attention to what?" "To the business, sir." "He's distracted." "There's a woman." Matteo's eyes hardened. There's always a woman before a fall. He closed the folder, the sound sharp enough to slice the air. "Find out who she is." The following morning, Lorenzo received a call from an unlisted number. "Your father wants dinner Sunday," the voice said. "He heard you're making friends." Lorenzo hung up without replying, a knot tightening in his chest. For years, he had balanced between loyalty and quiet rebellion, keeping the family clean through legitimate fronts while hiding his disgust for the violence behind them. But love, or whatever this pull was, threatened to expose the fracture. That night, he returned to the cafe long after closing. The chairs were stacked, the lights dim. He poured a drink and sat where she had been sitting earlier, tracing the rim of the cup she left behind. He whispered, "What are you doing to me?" The echo of his own voice was his only answer. Outside, rain started again, steady, relentless. A black car slowed near the curb, its engine idling. Inside, two of Matteo's men watched through the fogged windows. "That's him," one said. "Orders?" The other lit a cigarette. "Just watch for now. The old man wants to know what's worth risking his empire." Inside, Lorenzo felt the hairs on his neck rise, instinct honed from years of danger. He looked toward the window but saw only shadows. Somewhere in those shadows, the life he'd built on order and control was beginning to shift. He didn't yet know that Amara's past and his own were already entangled, or that the same rain that brought her to his door would one day wash away everything he thought untouchable. He only knew the air felt different, heavier, like a warning he couldn't name. And as thunder rolled above Mulberry Street, Lorenzo de Luca realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of death. He was afraid of what living might cost. The bell above the door chimed softly as Amara pushed it open, the sound barely audible over the rain that hissed against the pavement behind her. The warmth hit her first, a quiet exhale of roasted espresso and faint music. She brushed wet strands of hair from her face, embarrassed by the puddle forming beneath her shoes, but too exhausted to care. It had been another 12-hour shift at the clinic, another night of faces blurred by pain and fluorescent light. She only wanted a place to breathe. The cafe was nearly empty, 3 tables occupied, a man in a dark suit speaking in low tones near the back, and behind the counter a tall figure wiping the same glass though it was already clean. She hesitated, caught by the stillness in the room, by the way conversation seemed to soften when she stepped inside. She offered a polite smile. "Sorry, just trying to get out of the rain." The barista, an older man with kind eyes, nodded. "Stay as long as you need, miss." "Cappuccino?" "Yeah." "Tea, please." "Something strong." She moved toward a corner seat, setting her soaked bag down beside her, pulling out her journal as habit, not intention. Writing calmed her. It gave shape to the chaos in her mind. She opened to a page already filled with half-sentences about her brother, paused, then closed it quickly when she noticed the man behind the counter watching. Their eyes met for a heartbeat, his calm, hers wary, and she looked away first. He didn't smile, didn't look away either, just studied her as if searching for something he wasn't sure existed. When the tea arrived, she thanked the barista and wrapped both hands around the cup, savoring the burn on her palms. For a few minutes, she let herself listen to the rain, the faint jazz playing overhead, the sound of someone locking the back door. She told herself this was just another cafe, that the stillness she felt wasn't anything strange, yet her pulse said otherwise. She caught her reflection in the window, tired eyes, wet hair, the ghost of a life she was still trying to outrun. She whispered, almost to herself, "You have to stop running, Amara." The words hung in the air like a confession meant for no one. From behind the counter, Lorenzo heard it. Something in the tone, the fatigue, the fragile honesty, lodged inside him. He motioned to the barista, his voice low. "Send her the drink on the house." The man nodded, puzzled but obedient. When the cup was placed before her, she frowned slightly. "I didn't order this." The barista smiled. Compliments of the owner. She looked toward the counter again. Lorenzo met her gaze. "Consider it a welcome to the neighborhood." She hesitated, unsure whether to accept or decline. "That's kind, but you didn't have to." "Sometimes kindness is the least expensive thing we have left," he said quietly. The answer unsettled her more than it should have. She murmured, "Thank you," and took a sip, eyes dropping to the table. Something about his voice lingered, steady, deliberate, like a man used to being obeyed. Minutes passed. She finished her drink, wrote a few lines in her journal, and decided to leave a note, a small gesture of gratitude. 2 words, nothing more. "Thank you." She folded the slip neatly under the cup and rose to leave. As she reached the door, she glanced back once more. Lorenzo was still watching, but not with arrogance. There was curiosity in it, almost recognition. She left before it could turn into something else. Outside, the rain had eased to a whisper. The city glistened beneath streetlights, puddles catching colors from passing taxis. She walked briskly, coat pulled tight, aware of how empty the street felt. A car idled at the corner, headlights dimmed. She didn't notice at first, too busy replaying the brief encounter in her mind. Why had his eyes felt so heavy, so knowing? She tried to shake the thought. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe loneliness made her imagine attention where none existed. She reached the crosswalk, waiting for the light to change, when her phone buzzed, a text from her coworker checking that she'd made it home safely. She typed back quickly, "All good." Stopped for tea. Heading home now. As she slipped the phone into her pocket, she glanced toward the parked car. The silhouette inside moved, subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her skin prickle. She turned her pace into a casual hurry, refusing to look back. Inside the cafe, Lorenzo stood at the window, watching her go. Franco approached quietly behind him. "She's just another customer," he said. Lorenzo didn't answer. "Don't start caring, boss. Caring gets people noticed." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "I'm already noticed." Franco sighed. "Then at least be careful. The old man's been asking questions." Lorenzo turned from the glass. "Let him ask. He won't like the answers." Out on Mulberry Street, Amara cut through the narrow side lane that led to her building. The rain started again, gentle but insistent. She felt the weight of it, the rhythm syncing with her heartbeat. A noise echoed, a car door closing softly. She turned but saw nothing except reflections. She told herself it was her imagination, yet the unease clung to her like the wet fabric on her skin. Reaching her building, she keyed in, pausing once more to glance down the street. The same car was parked half a block away, engine off now, lights out. She couldn't see inside. A shiver ran through her. She whispered, "It's New York, Amara. People sit in cars all the time. You're fine." Still, she locked the door behind her twice. Across the street, the men in the car watched the light in her apartment window flicker on. "She's the one, huh?" one muttered. The other nodded. "Orders are just to keep an eye for now." "From who?" "From the sun." The first man smirked. "Since when do we babysit for love?" The answer came cold. "Since the boss forgot what happens when love gets in the way." Inside her apartment, Amara peeled off her wet clothes, slipped into an oversized sweater, and sat on the bed with her journal open. She began writing. There was something about him. Not charm exactly. More like stillness that felt familiar. "I don't know why it scared me." She stopped mid-sentence, staring at the rain on the window. For a reason she couldn't name, she whispered into the empty room. "Who are you, Lorenzo De Luca?" Back in the cafe, he unfolded the small note she had left and traced the words "thank you" with his thumb. He whispered, "You're welcome," though she was long gone. Then he slipped the paper into his pocket, unaware that outside, the same men who followed her had now turned their eyes on him, speaking into a phone quietly. "She's home. The son's interested." You were right. She doesn't look like trouble. The voice on the other end replied, measured and cold. They always don't until they are. Thunder rolled again over the city, muffled by distance. Amara lay back on her bed, eyes open, listening to it. In another part of town, Lorenzo stood alone behind the counter. The lights dimmed, the cup she drank from still sitting unwashed in the sink. Two lives, connected by chance and something darker neither yet understood, moved closer under the same storm. The rain outside grew harder, drumming against windows like a warning no one could hear. And somewhere between the rhythm of the storm and the silence of their thoughts, fate took its first real breath. The next morning came gray and heavy, the kind of light that flattened the city into shades of steel. Amara woke early, the unease from the night still pressed against her ribs. She told herself it was nothing, a trick of the storm, the echo of too many long shifts, but her instincts kept whispering that she hadn't walked home alone. At the clinic, she went through motions on autopilot, checking vitals, charting names, pretending that every patient's pain was enough to drown out her own. But every quiet moment returned her to that man in the cafe, his calm voice, his eyes that held more silence than most people could bear. She didn't know why he stayed in her head. Maybe it was the way he'd looked at her, not like a stranger, but like a memory that startled him. When her coworker Tasha noticed her zoning out, she nudged gently. You good, Bennett? You look like you saw a ghost. Amara forced a laugh. Just tired. Get some sleep. Or caffeine. Or both. That word, caffeine, sent her thoughts right back to Café Vitali. She shook her head, scolding herself for caring about a man whose last name she didn't even know. Across town, Lorenzo sat in the back office of the cafe, staring at the folded note she'd left. He'd memorized her handwriting without meaning to. It was simple, clean, precise, like someone who organized her chaos by lines on paper. He told himself to forget it. He told himself she was a distraction, and distractions got people killed. But by afternoon, he'd instructed the same barista to keep her favorite tea stocked, as if expectation itself were part of routine business. Franco noticed. You planning to run a hospital out of here now? We serving nurses for free? Lorenzo gave no answer, just a glance that ended the joke. When he stepped out later to watch the rain taper off, he saw a young man in a black coat waiting by the curb. One of his father's eyes, no doubt. He lit a cigarette, exhaled slow, and murmured, Tell him I'm fine. Tell him to mind his ghosts. The man didn't move. Lorenzo added, colder, or I'll send them company. That broke the stare. The car drove off. Evening came again, humid and uneasy. Amara finished her shift and debated taking another route home, but the pull of warmth and tea, and maybe something she refused to name, dragged her back to Mulberry Street. The bell above the door chimed as before, softer this time. She saw him at the counter, sleeves rolled, eyes already on her. He didn't speak immediately. Rain again, he said finally. She smiled faintly. Seems like it follows me. Or maybe you follow it, he replied. Their small exchange felt ordinary to anyone else, but inside both, the moment carried weight neither could define. She took her corner seat.
He brought the tea himself this time.
When she thanked him, he lingered a moment longer than politeness required. Long day. She nodded. They're all long. Then this one's on the house too. She frowned playfully. You'll go broke if you keep doing that. He met her gaze. I can afford kindness. It wasn't flirtation, it was confession. She looked away first again, her heart doing something inconvenient. They talked a little more about the weather, the noise of the city, the small exhaustion that comes with trying to start over. At one point she asked, You ever think about leaving New York? He answered after a long pause. Every day. But men like me don't get to leave. We just change the view. She didn't understand fully, but heard the sadness underneath and said softly, Then maybe one day, you'll find a way. It startled him how much he wanted to believe her. He caught himself almost smiling. Maybe. When she finished her tea, she stood, thanked him again, and said she'd be back. As she stepped into the damp air, he watched her go, fighting the instinct to send one of his men after her for protection. But he'd already done that without realizing. Down the street, the same dark car from the night before idled by the curb. Inside, Enzo and the younger lookout traded glances as she passed under a flickering streetlight. "She's back again," the younger said. Enzo grunted. "The boss told us to keep her safe. That's all we do." "Safe from who?" Enzo's expression hardened. "From everyone, including him." They waited until she disappeared around the corner before pulling away slowly, taillights vanishing into mist. Amara's apartment was 3 blocks away. She walked slower tonight, the city quieter than usual. Her mind played over the conversation, his careful words, the flicker in his eyes when she'd mentioned leaving. It wasn't attraction alone she felt. It was something closer to empathy, though she couldn't explain for what. When she reached the alley that cut behind her building, a sound stopped her, a soft metallic click, like a lighter snapping shut. She froze, turning slightly. No one there. Only rain collecting in gutters, a newspaper pressed against a lamppost. She told herself again that it was nothing, but her hand still trembled when she unlocked her door. Inside, she pressed her back to the wood, breathing out a shaky laugh. Paranoid much? But the unease wouldn't fade. She drew her curtains, turned on the radio, and tried to drown the feeling with music. 2 blocks away, Lorenzo's phone buzzed. He answered without checking the ID. "She's home," Enzo said. "Good. Boss, you sure about this? The old man's gonna smell something." Lorenzo's voice stayed even. "Then let him. If he asks, she's just a customer. If he pushes, tell him she's under my protection." A silence, then Enzo. "You really think she's worth all that?" Lorenzo looked toward the empty seat she'd left behind, the faint mark of her cup still on the table. "She reminds me that there's still something worth protecting." He ended the call before he could explain what that meant. Hours later, as midnight blurred into morning, Amara sat on her bed writing again. "I went back to the cafe."
He remembered me.
He shouldn't have, but he did. There's something dangerous about a man who notices small things. She stopped, drew a small sketch, a cup of tea, a hand reaching for it, and stared at it until her eyelids grew heavy. Outside her window, a car slowed, paused, then moved on. She didn't hear it, already drifting into uneasy sleep. Across the city, in a penthouse wrapped in glass, Don Matteo de Luca poured himself a drink and watched lightning flash over the skyline. A lieutenant entered, hesitant. "There's talk your son's keeping company with a woman outside the circle." Matteo didn't turn. "Describe her." "American.
Nurse.
Mid-30s. Clean record." He took a slow sip, eyes narrowing. "Clean people make dirty mistakes. Find out what she means to him before she means trouble to me." The lieutenant nodded and left. Matteo whispered to the night, "My son forgets that hearts are weaknesses. Maybe she'll remind him the hard way." Back in her apartment, Amara stirred from sleep, sensing movement in the hallway outside her door. Footsteps, then silence. She waited, holding her breath. A minute later came the faint scrape of paper sliding beneath the door. She crept forward, crouched, and picked it up. A single napkin, folded twice, with 2 words written in neat black ink. "Be careful." Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. She opened the door quickly. Nothing. Only the echo of footsteps descending the stairs. She shut it again, locking it 3 times, staring at the napkin as if it might speak. There was no signature, but she didn't need one. Only one man she'd met in the last 24 hours spoke like that. She whispered, "Lorenzo, why?" Her hands shook as she set the napkin on her dresser. Outside, thunder rolled again. Down on the street, a figure in a black coat disappeared into the rain, phone pressed to his ear. "It's done," he said. On the other end, Lorenzo's voice was barely audible. "She'll know I'm watching now. That's enough." What neither realized was that another phone line stayed open, one that led straight to Don Matteo's desk. He listened, expression unreadable, then closed the call with a single phrase. "If she walks into that cafe again, make sure someone else is watching too." Days passed quietly, but silence in Lorenzo's world was never peace. It was the calm that settled before someone made their move. Amara had returned to the cafe 3 times since that night. Each visit began with small talk and ended with something unsaid lingering in the air. She pretended not to notice the way his attention always found her, how he seemed to anticipate her order before she spoke, how the barista would disappear conveniently, leaving them alone with the hum of the espresso machine filling the space between their words. To anyone else, she was just another customer, but in his eyes, she had become a pattern, one he could neither control nor walk away from. She told herself she came back for the tea, for the quiet, for the warmth that was rare in a city of strangers, but deep down she knew that wasn't true. It was curiosity, that quiet pull that made her want to understand the man who spoke with such precision, who could silence a room without raising his voice. When she caught his gaze lingering too long, she'd look away quickly, then find herself glancing back, as if defiance might disguise fascination. One afternoon, she arrived later than usual, still wearing her scrubs, hair tied up, exhaustion visible in the slump of her shoulders. Lorenzo noticed immediately. "Rough day?" he asked, sliding a cup toward her before she even ordered. She smiled faintly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Every day's rough. Today just forgot to pretend." He allowed himself the smallest smile. "You fix people all day, Amara. Someone should make sure you get fixed too." The way he said her name, it sounded like a vow, not a word. "I'll settle for a quiet evening and something hot," she said, breaking the moment. "You're in the right place," he replied softly and walked back behind the counter, but his gaze stayed on her reflection in the glass. What neither of them noticed was the man sitting at the far table, pretending to read a newspaper. His earpiece was barely visible beneath dark hair, and the phone on the table wasn't his. Don Matteo's reach extended into every shadow, and tonight, his son's newfound distraction was under scrutiny. "She's harmless," Lorenzo had told him. The report in Matteo's hand now said otherwise. Connections uncertain. Emotional link confirmed. Potential liability. He'd smiled when he read it, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Love," he muttered, "the oldest disease." At Café Vitale, Amara finished her drink and leaned forward. "You know, you never told me what you do when you're not here," she said. Lorenzo didn't flinch. "This place keeps me busy enough." "That's not really an answer," she replied. He looked at her for a long moment before saying, "Then maybe I don't have one." She chuckled quietly. "That's impossible. Everyone's something." "And what are you?" he asked. She thought about it. "Tired."
Trying.
"Still here." He nodded. "That's more honest than most." The simplicity of their exchange said more than anything else could have. The world outside that cafe was built on lies, and somehow, in her presence, truth had started to feel safe again. Before you continue this story, like, subscribe, and share. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and if you've been following since the first act, drop "still watching" below so we know you're here with us through the storm. As evening stretched into night, Amara noticed details she hadn't before. How the men at the back table never ordered much, but always stayed until closing. How Lorenzo's phone vibrated often, but he rarely answered it. How the cafe's door locks were replaced twice in a week. Something about the rhythm of the place had changed. She wanted to ask, but didn't. Instead, she told herself she was imagining things. People were allowed to have secrets. Not every secret was dangerous. Still, when she left that night, she felt his eyes on her until the door shut behind her. Lorenzo waited until she was gone before turning to Franco. "You're sure the men posted outside know the rule?" Franco crossed his arms. "No harm, no contact, no questions. But Matteo's been asking about her again. I can only stall so long." Lorenzo's tone hardened. "You stall forever if you have to." Franco's voice dropped. "He's your father, not a man you can keep on a leash." "He's an old man who's forgotten what loyalty costs," Lorenzo replied. "Remind him." Franco hesitated. "And if he doesn't listen?" Lorenzo's eyes lifted slowly. "Then make him." That night, Amara walked home with a strange heaviness in her chest. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the feeling that her life was brushing against something larger, something that hummed beneath the surface of ordinary days. She thought about Lorenzo's quiet command of a room, about the way his presence felt protective but heavy, like a shield that came with a price. She didn't know why it mattered so much. He was just a man who ran a cafe. A man who remembered her tea order. A man whose silence made her heart race. But when she reached her apartment and found a black car parked across the street again, headlights off, engine idling faintly, that fragile rationalization cracked. She watched from her window, lights off, as the car stayed for 10 minutes, then pulled away. The fear didn't come from the car. It came from the fact that part of her already knew whose world that car belonged to. Across the city, Lorenzo sat at his desk, staring at a folder marked with her name. Franco had brought it hours earlier, his voice grim. He's digging deeper, boss. Your father's people pulled her records, family, address, employer. Everything. Lorenzo clenched his jaw. Then we move first. And do what? Make sure nothing in her life can be used against her. Quietly. Franco hesitated. You're crossing lines. I crossed them the day I let her walk into my cafe, Lorenzo said. He closed the folder and leaned back, whispering to himself, and the day I didn't let her go. The next morning, Amara woke to find her phone buzzing with missed calls from the clinic. When she arrived, her supervisor pulled her aside. Strange thing, someone called last night claiming to be a private donor. They want to cover 6 months of operating costs for the clinic. Said they'd heard good things about you. About me, she repeated. That's what they said. Didn't leave a name. Amara smiled awkwardly, but something about it didn't sit right. She asked, did they sound familiar?
No.
But who turns down free money? Her boss laughed. She tried to laugh too, but her stomach tightened. That evening, she returned to Café Vitali, determined to ask him about the napkin he'd slipped under her door, about the car, about the unease that kept her awake at night. But when she saw him, leaning over the counter, sleeves rolled, eyes fixed on her like she was the only clear thing in a blurred world, her words faltered. Rough day, he asked again, his tone a quiet echo of before.
We keep having those, she said.
It's the city, he replied. It grinds people until they forget they're alive. And what about you? She asked. Do you forget? He smiled faintly. Only when I remember too much. For a moment, their silence said everything about pain, about recognition, about the kind of connection that feels like danger disguised as comfort. She reached for her cup, and his hand brushed hers, accidentally, maybe, but neither moved away quickly enough to make it meaningless. You don't have to look out for me, she said softly. You're not one of my patients. Maybe I should be, he said, eyes meeting hers. I'm told I'm not easy to fix. Then you're in trouble, she replied, smiling faintly. Because I only work on people who want to get better. He looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. What if I just want to stop feeling worse? She didn't know how to answer that. Outside, unnoticed, a man across the street lifted his phone, snapping a photo through the window. 2 figures leaning close under warm light, the tension between them almost visible. The photo was sent within seconds. Don Mateo received it with a smirk. There it is, he told his lieutenant. Attachment. He poured himself another drink. And attachments make men weak. By the time Amara left that night, the rain had started again. She waved goodbye, smiling when he told her to be careful like he always did. But halfway down the block, the unease returned. The car was there again. Same color, same plate. She quickened her pace, heart racing. Turning a corner, she stopped suddenly. A figure stood under the awning of the laundromat, watching her. For a second, neither moved. Then he stepped back into shadow. She hurried home, locking the door behind her. Inside, she pressed her hands to her face, whispering, What are you mixed up in, Lorenzo? In the cafe, Lorenzo's phone buzzed again. Another message from an unknown number. A photo. Her and him. A single caption beneath it. You're being watched. He stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it, knowing exactly who had sent it. He poured a drink, looked toward the rain-soaked street, and said to no one, "Then let them watch." And while Amara tried to convince herself she was imagining things, outside her building, the same car idled longer than usual. The man in the driver's seat made a call. "She's starting to notice," he said quietly. The voice on the other end, cold, measured, replied, "Good. Fear makes truth easier to see." The line went dead. The night deepened. Inside her apartment, Amara sat by the window, staring at the streetlight's reflection on wet pavement. Something inside her whispered that the cafe she had found refuge in was no refuge at all, that the man who made her feel safe might be the reason she would never truly be again. Before you continue this story, like, subscribe, and share. Tell us where you're watching from, and drop "I'm still here" if you can feel the tension building, because the next act will reveal that some kinds of protection come with a price. The night after the rain, the air carried a heaviness that felt almost human. Amara stood outside Café Vitali for a moment before pushing the door open, letting the familiar chime announce her return. Inside, the cafe looked exactly as it always did. Clean counters, soft jazz, the faint hiss of steam, and yet something in the atmosphere had changed. She couldn't explain it, but she felt watched even before she crossed the room. Lorenzo looked up from behind the counter, surprise flashing across his face and vanishing just as quickly. "You're back," he said quietly. She gave a small nod. "Couldn't stay away." Her tone tried for lightness, but carried too much truth. He poured her usual tea without asking and slid it toward her. "Long day." "You could say that." "You always do," he replied, a faint smile flickering across his mouth before fading into thought. She wanted to ask about the car, about the strange napkin that had appeared under her door, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she said, "You ever get the feeling you're walking into a place that remembers more about you than you remember about it?" He studied her. "All the time." A few customers lingered at the back, men she hadn't seen before, broad-shouldered, quiet, their attention fixed on the door more than their drinks. Something about them felt wrong. They didn't fit the cafe's warmth. They looked like they were waiting for orders, not coffee. She glanced toward them and asked, "You know them?" Lorenzo's eyes followed hers briefly. "Business," he said. "They won't bother you." The way he said it, short, certain, dismissive, told her not to ask more. She took a sip of her tea, forcing a smile. "You keep strange company." "Strange people keep me," he corrected softly. As evening thickened, the cafe emptied until only those men and one tired barista remained. Lorenzo disappeared through the back door, murmuring something about inventory. Amara watched him go, then looked toward the window, trying to calm the restlessness that had been building all day. She told herself she'd finish her tea and leave, but then she heard it, voices behind the door he'd just passed through. At first it was muffled, words slipping between laughter and low murmurs. She turned slightly in her chair, straining to listen. "Shipment goes out tomorrow night, no police, no eyes," another voice responded. The old man said, "Keep it quiet. He's already cleaning up that nurse thing." Her breath caught. "Nurse." Her fingers tightened around the cup. One of the men laughed. Who knew the boss's kid had a type? Sweet, quiet, easy to ruin. There was a sound of glass hitting wood, then a silence sharp enough to cut through the walls. A door creaked and she froze. Someone was coming back out. She grabbed her coat, acting busy, pretending to scroll her phone as Lorenzo stepped back into the main room. His expression was calm, but his knuckles were raw, one split open. He glanced at the men, then at her. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah," she said too quickly. "Just about to head home." He nodded. "I'll walk you out." "You don't have to. I insist." The tone left no room for refusal. Outside, the night was colder than it should have been. They walked in silence until they reached the corner. "You shouldn't walk alone this late," he said. "I've been fine every other night. That doesn't mean you'll always be." His gaze was steady, protective, almost pleading. She wanted to believe the concern was innocent, but the voices she'd heard replayed in her mind like a broken record. "What do you really do here, Lorenzo?" she asked. He paused, exhaling smoke from a cigarette he hadn't lit. "I run a cafe." "No," she said, stepping closer. You control something. I can feel it. He smiled faintly, but it was tired. You feel too much. That's your problem. And you don't feel enough, she shot back. The tension hung between them, not anger, but the recognition that both were right. Later that night, Lorenzo sat alone in his office, a single lamp burning beside an unopened file. Franco entered quietly. You might want to see this, he said, placing another folder on the desk. Lorenzo flipped it open and stopped breathing. A photo of Amara stared back at him. Driver's license, address, employment details, family background. Attached was an old police report. Fatal hit and run, Richmond, Virginia. His father's signature appeared at the bottom under a coded directive. It was one of ours, Franco said softly. He ordered it himself. Wrong target. Lorenzo's hand trembled. When? 5 years ago. And he knew. He never forgets a debt. Lorenzo's throat tightened. He looked at her picture again, the same gentle face that had become the only clean thing in his life, and whispered, She's the ghost I've been trying to forget. Franco hesitated. You can't tell her. I already did, without words. Then end it before he does. Lorenzo closed the file and stood.
No.
I end him first. Meanwhile, Amara sat on her couch, heart racing as she wrote in her journal. I heard things tonight. Words no one should say near coffee and sugar. I think he's dangerous, but part of me still feels safe near him. What's wrong with me? She flipped through older pages, landing on a sketch of her brother, then on another, a card drawn from memory, headlights blinding. Her breath hitched when she noticed something she'd never paid attention to before, a symbol she'd doodled years ago from the police report, a small lion crest printed on the car manufacturer's document. She grabbed her phone and searched the emblem. De Luca Exports. Her blood went cold. Back in the cafe, Lorenzo paced. Franco watched silently. If you go against him, you'll start a war, Franco warned. He started it when he touched her life. And what happens when she finds out whose name is on the order? Lorenzo looked up, eyes hollow. Then I'll stop being the man who caused it. That's not redemption, Franco said quietly. That's suicide. Lorenzo picked up his coat. Maybe that's the price. At midnight, unable to sleep, Amara returned to Café Vitali. The door was unlocked though the lights were dim. She hesitated, then stepped inside. The smell of coffee had been replaced by the faint trace of gun oil and cigarette smoke. Lorenzo, she called softly. No answer. She moved toward the back, hearing low voices again. Through a small crack in the door, she saw him, standing opposite an older man she hadn't seen before. Don Matteo de Luca looked like power aged into cruelty. His voice was calm, his tone venomous. You think I don't see what you're doing? You're protecting her. You think you can cleanse this name with her blood? Lorenzo's jaw clenched. She's innocent. No one near us stays innocent. You should know that by now. She's not part of this. She became part of it the moment you looked at her like she was salvation. Matteo poured himself a drink. You're my son. I built everything you touch. You owe me your loyalty. Lorenzo stepped forward slowly. I owe you nothing but the truth. Then say it. You killed her brother. Matteo froze, then smiled faintly. Collateral. He was never meant to matter. He mattered to her, Lorenzo said, voice breaking. And that means he matters to me. Matteo turned away. Then you've chosen your side. Let's hope she's worth dying for. Amara backed away, trembling. The sound of her heels scraping against the floor betrayed her. Both men turned toward the door. What was that? Matteo hissed. Lorenzo's eyes widened. Amara? He rushed forward, flinging the door open, but she was already gone, sprinting into the street. Rain had started again, heavy, relentless. He shouted her name, but she didn't stop. She ran until the lights of the cafe blurred into streaks of color. She reached her apartment, slamming the door behind her, collapsing to the floor. Her mind replayed the conversation, every word, every confirmation. Her brother's death, the crest, the family name, all of it tangled into one unbearable truth. She pressed her palms against her ears, whispering, "No, no, no." But the truth was louder than denial. She stood, shaking, staring at her reflection in the mirror. "You let him in," she whispered. "You trusted him." Across town, Lorenzo stood in the empty street, soaked to the bone, staring in the direction she'd run. Franco's car pulled up beside him. "She heard," Lorenzo said flatly. Franco cursed under his breath. "Then it's over." Lorenzo nodded slowly. "For her, maybe. For me, not yet." Back in her apartment, Amara grabbed the box of letters she'd written to her brother and threw them onto the bed, pages scattering like confessions. One page tore open, the ink smudged from years of tears. She whispered, "I found him, Noah. I found the man who killed you." Then quieter, almost to herself, "And I fell in love with his son." She sank to the floor, shaking as the storm raged outside. A shadow moved past her window, brief but certain, a reminder that even now she wasn't alone. Someone was watching. The headlights of a car flickered once, then went dark. And in that silence, a single thought settled inside her like a verdict. The world she'd stepped into was built on her brother's grave. The city had begun to feel like a wound that refused to close. After that night, Lorenzo and Amara moved through separate silences, each pretending distance could undo the truth. Yet the world around them was closing in faster than grief could cool. Don Mateo's men now occupied corners of the cafe, like shadows given form, their presence quiet but unmistakable. Customers had thinned. Those who came sensed danger and paid in cash, leaving before their coffee cooled. Rumors traveled faster than espresso machines could hum, talk of police watching, of rivals smelling weakness. Lorenzo barely slept. When he did, it was in his office, the sound of thunder masking the nightmares. Franco warned him daily. "You're losing ground," he said. "Your father's calling in debts. Men are switching sides." Lorenzo answered without looking up. "Let them. Loyalty bought with fear is already gone. Fear keeps them in line. So does respect." Franco laughed dryly. "Respect won't stop a bullet." Lorenzo poured himself a drink. "Neither will begging." Amara tried to pretend life continued. She went to work, smiled for patience, hid her shaking hands. But at night the memories returned. The argument she'd overheard, the revelation of her brother's death, Lorenzo's voice saying her name like prayer and curse. She wanted to hate him, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw the look in his when he'd said, "She's innocent." That contradiction, his violence and his tenderness, haunted her. She avoided Mulberry Street for days, but the pull of unfinished emotion proved stronger than fear. On the fifth night, she found herself walking toward Café Vitali again, telling herself it was only to make him say it aloud. The door was half-locked. Inside, lights dimmed, two men whispered by the counter. One glanced up, startled. "We're closed." She hesitated. "I'm here for Lorenzo." "He's not seeing anyone." The tone was too final to argue with, but she caught a movement in the back, his silhouette crossing behind the frosted glass. Their eyes met for an instant before one of the men stepped between them. "Ma'am, please." She turned, leaving before her voice could betray her heart. In the back room, Franco closed the door. "She's getting brave." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "She's scared, not brave." "Your father's men saw her. If Mateo thinks you're still in contact, he'll finish what he started." Lorenzo exhaled sharply. "Then I end this my way." Franco frowned. "And what way is that?" "I shut down everything. No shipments, no money flow, no deals. Cut off his empire at the root. That's suicide. It's justice. It's rebellion. Call it what you want," Lorenzo said, pulling open a drawer and taking out a handgun. "But by the time he realizes, it'll be too late." Across town, Don Mateo met with his lieutenants in a private dining room above a restaurant that paid for silence with rent. "He's choking the pipeline," one reported. "Funds from the docks stopped 2 nights ago." Mateo stirred his drink. "So, the boy thinks love makes him clever." He's got help, another said. Franco's running cover. Matteo smiled faintly. Franco always was sentimental. Handle him first. Quietly. A pause followed. And the girl? We keep eyes on her, Matteo said. Pain is leverage. The sun will crawl back when she bleeds. By the weekend, chaos had replaced routine. One of Lorenzo's warehouses went dark, shipments vanished. An ally defected to a rival crew. Police started sniffing around, their questions disguised as casual visits. Inside the cafe, Lorenzo kept his composure. To Amara's eyes, if she had seen him then, he might have looked serene, an artist arranging the final pieces of a dying masterpiece. He spent nights in ledgers, erasing accounts, redirecting assets under false names. Franco watched him burn what others would kill to own. You're destroying a dynasty, he said quietly. Lorenzo replied, it was built on ashes anyway. Amara couldn't keep away forever. The seventh night, exhaustion outweighed fear. She walked back into the cafe, shoulders tense. Lorenzo looked up from behind the counter, surprise softening into something sad. You shouldn't be here, he said. Then tell me to leave. You wouldn't listen. Try me. He came around the counter, stopping a few feet away. You heard things you weren't meant to hear. You know what my family is. You should run. I tried, she said. It didn't work. For a moment, silence filled the room like thick air. Did you know, she asked finally, about my brother? He met her gaze. Not until recently. And when you found out? I wanted to fix it. You can't fix murder, Lorenzo. No, he said quietly, but I can make sure it doesn't happen again. She laughed once, bitterly. You think killing more people makes it better? It's the only language they understand. And what about you? She asked. What language do you speak? He looked down, voice almost broken. Yours. Before either could say more, the door slammed open. Franco entered fast, face pale. They're here. Lorenzo turned sharply. How many? 3 cars, maybe 4. Your father sent hitters. They're watching the street now. Amara's pulse spiked. What does that mean? Franco answered for him. It means you need to go.
Now.
Lorenzo grabbed her arm. Back door. Don't stop, don't look back. I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice. She shook her head. Lorenzo. Amara, please. His voice cracked on the word. For a second, she saw the fear he never showed. She nodded reluctantly. Franco guided her out through the kitchen exit into the narrow alley. Rain had begun again, faint but steady. Inside, Lorenzo moved fast, pulling down metal shutters, turning off lights. The men outside advanced cautiously, weapons under coats. He could hear the crunch of gravel, the low hum of engines idling. Franco returned, breathless. She's clear. You sure? I watched her cross the corner.
Good.
Lorenzo loaded his gun. Then let's make it count. Outside, Don Matteo's men spread out, communicating through whispers. One raised his hand, signaled to move in. But before they reached the door, the first explosion tore through the air. Smoke billowed from the rear warehouse across the street. Lorenzo had rigged it hours earlier, a distraction. He stepped into the doorway, gun steady. The first shot dropped a man instantly. The rest ducked for cover. Franco shouted, We've got 5 minutes before cops show. Plenty, Lorenzo said, firing again. He wasn't reckless. Every move was deliberate, every step measured like a man who'd already made peace with the outcome. Amara, 2 blocks away, heard the gunfire echo and stopped running. Her chest tightened as lights flickered red against the rain. People screamed, cars veered. She turned back, instinct drowning out reason. When she reached the end of Mulberry Street, smoke clouded the air. Through it, she saw figures darting, flashes of gunfire. She ducked behind a parked car, trembling. Her mind screamed to leave, but her heart refused. Inside the cafe, glass shattered. Franco was hit in the shoulder, but stayed upright. They're pushing from both sides, he said, gritting his teeth. Lorenzo dragged him behind the counter. Hold pressure. Forget me, Franco hissed. Go. We go together. You'll die for her, won't you? Franco said through clenched teeth. Lorenzo's eyes hardened. I'll die for what she made me remember. Don Mateo arrived minutes later, escorted by 2 guards. He stepped over the bodies without looking down, his suit untouched by rain. Enough, he said. The gunfire stopped on command. You're finished, son. Lorenzo stood, chest heaving. Maybe, but so are you. Mateo smirked. You think you can end me with bullets? No, Lorenzo said, lowering his weapon. I'll end you with silence. Every account closed, every ally gone. You'll own nothing but your name, and even that means less now. Mateo's smile faded. You're still my blood. That's your curse, Lorenzo answered. Sirens wailed in the distance. Mateo gestured to his men. Clean it up. Leave him breathing. Let the law take what's left. As he turned to leave, Franco fired one last shot from the floor, catching a guard in the leg. Chaos erupted again. Lorenzo grabbed Franco, dragging him toward the back exit, bullets splintering wood above them. They burst into the alley just as police cruisers rounded the corner. Amara saw them emerge through the haze, Lorenzo half carrying Franco. Lorenzo, she screamed before realizing what she'd done. He froze, eyes meeting hers across the distance. For a second, time narrowed to the sound of rain between them. Then a shot cracked from somewhere unseen, striking the wall inches from her head. Lorenzo shouted, "Run." She hesitated, then obeyed, disappearing into the maze of streets. He watched until she vanished, then turned to face the oncoming police lights, gun lowered. They arrested him before dawn. Reporters would later call it the fall of the De Luca heir. The papers loved tragedy dressed as justice. But within the empire, whispers spread that he'd let himself be caught, that surrender was strategy, not defeat. Amara spent the following day in hiding at a friend's apartment, replaying the night in fragments, the explosion, the gunfire, his voice telling her to run. Every time she tried to rest, sirens echoed in her mind. She turned on the television once, saw his face in handcuffs, and turned it off again. The ache in her chest was something new, half relief, half grief. Across the city, Don Mateo sat in his office reading the morning headlines. De Luca's son in custody after shootout. He smiled faintly. And the girl? He asked. One of his men replied. Gone. We're searching. Mateo leaned back. Find her before the police do. I want the last thing he sees to be what his love cost. That night, Amara returned to her apartment. The door was ajar. Inside, the lights were off. She stepped carefully, calling out, "Who's there?" No response. She reached for her phone, but a voice stopped her cold. You should have stayed away. It was one of Mateo's lieutenants, emerging from the dark. The old man sends his regards. He raised a gun. Amara froze, breath caught in her throat. From the window behind him came a sudden noise, the faint click of metal. A shot rang out. The man dropped before he could turn. Smoke curled in the air, and in the shattered frame of the window stood Franco, pale, bleeding through bandages. Told you, he said, grimacing. He'd never let you go unprotected. She rushed to him. Franco, you're hurt. I've been worse. We need to move. Mateo won't stop. Where's Lorenzo?
Jail.
For now. For now. Because someone will make sure that doesn't last. The sound of distant sirens grew again, mingling with the rain. Franco staggered toward the door. Go to the station tomorrow. Tell them what you heard about the hidden run about Mateo. Give them something to keep him busy. Lorenzo bought you time, use it. And you, she asked. He smiled faintly. I was never supposed to outlive him anyway. Then he was gone into the night, leaving her standing alone, heart pounding, realizing that safety had become another illusion. She sat by the window until dawn, watching the first light break through clouds, wondering if love could exist between people surrounded by death. The answer came quietly, carried on memory rather than hope. Love, she thought, wasn't about safety. It was about choosing someone even when the world was on fire. Outside, on Mulberry Street, smoke still rose from the ruins of Café Vitali. The rain that had washed blood from Mulberry Street returned the next night, steady and cold, as if the city itself were trying to rinse away the memory of what it had witnessed. Amara woke before dawn from a dream that wasn't quite a dream, her brother calling her name, a crash of headlights, Lorenzo's face caught between guilt and tenderness. She sat up in the dark, her chest tight, the sound of the storm echoing her heartbeat. On the nightstand lay the envelope she had avoided opening again. The report was already burned into her memory, but pain has a way of demanding proof. She unfolded it anyway, her eyes tracing Matteo de Luca's signature like a wound reopened. Every line whispered the same truth. The man she had loved was the son of the one who had destroyed her family. Still, another voice inside her whispered back, the one that remembered his hands trembling when he said please for the first time, the one that had seen him bleed for her. She pressed the paper flat, whispering, "You wanted honesty, Amara. Now you have it." Across town, Lorenzo sat in the county detention center, the fluorescent lights turning night into endless morning. The bruises along his jaw had darkened, reminders of both the fight and the surrender. He stared at the wall until it stopped looking like concrete and started looking like confession. Franco was gone. He didn't know where, and Matteo's reach still stretched beyond the bars. A guard passed by every few minutes, eyes averted. Favors had been called in. Lorenzo had traded freedom for time to dismantle what his father built, to keep Amara breathing a little longer. When the cell door clanged shut for evening count, he whispered, "Worth it," though even he couldn't tell if he meant her safety or his punishment. Amara spent the morning walking to the police station and back again, without going inside. Her mind was at war. Tell them what she knew and risk being pulled into the same cage as him, or stay silent and let the truth rot beneath the weight of loyalty. By noon she was sitting outside the cafe's ruins, its front window boarded, the sign faded from smoke. A single chair remained upright. She imagined him there, the quiet confidence, the way he stirred sugar without tasting his coffee. The memory almost made her smile until she remembered what the coffee had covered up. "You lied," she said softly, as though he were sitting across from her again. "But you also protected me." The contradiction broke something open. She stood abruptly, turning toward the courthouse. If she was going to end this, she needed to see him one last time. By evening, the sky dimmed into bruised purple. Lorenzo's attorney, a man who owed him favors that could never be repaid, arranged a brief meeting in a holding room. When Amara entered, she almost didn't recognize him. The tailored suits replaced by a gray uniform, his hair unkempt, his expression stripped of power. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then he said, "You shouldn't have come. And yet here I am." His eyes lowered. "You read the report, every word. Then you know that your father killed my brother?" "Yes." "That I tried to stop him once I found out." "Tried," she said, voice trembling. "Lorenzo, you are him whether you like it or not. You carry his name, his money, his blood." He met her gaze steadily. "I never wanted his name. But you used it when it suited you. I used it to survive. You used it to control me." Silence filled the room, thick enough to drown in. He leaned forward slightly, shackled hands tightening. "If I could give it all back, the money, the name, the years, to change what happened to him, I would." "And what about me?" she asked. "Would you change meeting me too?" The question hung like smoke. He hesitated. "No," he said finally, "because meeting you showed me what I'd become." She wanted to stay angry. It was safer than forgiving. But something in his voice cracked the armor she'd spent nights rebuilding. "You think that's enough?" she whispered. "Realization." "No," he said quietly. "But it's the only start I have left." A guard knocked on the door, signaling time. She turned away before her tears could betray her. "I don't know if I hate you or pity you," she said. He answered. "Both mean you still care." The words hit harder than he intended. She left without looking back, but outside, her knees buckled. She sat on the courthouse steps under the rain. the sound of traffic drowning her sobs. That night, Matteo met with his lawyer in a penthouse high above the city, watching the storm from a wall of glass. "The boy is still alive," the lawyer said. "He won't be for long," Matteo replied. "The state will handle it for me. Accidents happen in custody." "And the girl?" Matteo poured himself a drink. "Find her. Make sure she disappears before she remembers who she is." The lawyer hesitated. "There's talk she might testify. Then she dies before she does." Amara returned home exhausted, unaware that two of Matteo's men sat in a car across the street. Inside, she packed a small bag, passport, cash, the letters to her brother, but when she looked at her reflection, she froze. Running again would mean letting him win. "No," she murmured. "You already took one life. You don't get mine." She picked up her phone and dialed a number she had sworn never to call. "Detective Mendez," came the voice. "It's Amara Bennett. I have information on the De Luca family." The silence that followed was long enough to scare her. "Where did you get this number?" he asked. "From a nurse at St. Vincent's. She said you were looking into the docks." "You understand what you're stepping into?" "I understand what I've lost," she said. "That's enough." They arranged to meet the next morning. In his cell, Lorenzo received word from Franco through a smuggled note. "Matteo knows she's alive.
Get out or she's next."
He read it twice, then tore it in half, swallowing the pieces. His attorney visited soon after. "Your arraignment's set for Friday," the man said. "We can bargain. You give up information on Matteo, I get you protection." Lorenzo shook his head. "No deals. You'll rot in there. Better me than her." The lawyer sighed. "You're a fool." "Maybe," Lorenzo replied, "but I'm a fool with something left to lose." Near midnight, Amara lay awake listening to footsteps outside her door. She reached for the baseball bat she kept near the bed, a nurse's habit in a city that forgot mercy. The sound faded. When she peeked through the blinds, the street was empty except for a black sedan idling 2 houses down. Her pulse quickened. She turned off the light, slipped out the back door, and crossed through the alley to the corner store, heart racing with every step. From a payphone, she dialed Mendez again. "They're here," she whispered. "Stay put," he said. "I'm sending a unit." "No," she said. "If you come now, they'll know. I'll draw them out." "That's insane." "It's justice." She hung up before he could stop her. By dawn, the sedan was gone, replaced by silence that felt worse. Mendez arrived in plain clothes, eyes sharp. "You should have left the city," he said. "If I leave, Matteo wins." "You're brave." "No," she said. "I'm just tired of running." He gave her a small recorder. "When you talk to him, wear this." "To who?" "Lorenzo. He's being transferred to federal custody tomorrow. If he'll testify, we can take Matteo down for good." She hesitated. "He won't betray his father." "He already has," Mendez said. "He just doesn't know it yet." That afternoon, she visited Lorenzo one final time. He looked worse. Exhaustion carved into his face, eyes dulled but alert. "You came again," he said softly. "To finish what you started?" "To give you a choice," she replied. "Testify against your father. Save yourself." He laughed once, humorless. "You think survival's what I want? Then what do you want?" "For him to pay. For you to live." She leaned forward. "You can have both." He stared at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Then I'll take the one that doesn't damn you." "Lorenzo, if you stay silent, he'll kill you." "If I speak, he'll kill you." She swallowed hard. "Then we both lose." Maybe that's the only way the curse ends. As she left the room, her hand brushed the small recorder hidden in her jacket pocket. His confession, his acknowledgement of Matteo's crimes, was there, unplanned but undeniable. Mendez would have what he needed. Yet as she stepped into the sunlight outside the courthouse, guilt crushed her chest. Betrayal felt colder than forgiveness ever could. She looked back once, whispering, "I'm sorry." Inside his cell, Lorenzo sensed the shift before anyone told him. Guards moving differently, whispers traveling faster. By evening, he knew, the feds had evidence linking Matteo to past murders. The file came from an anonymous source. He didn't need a name. She did what I couldn't, he murmured. Pride and heartbreak twisted together until they were indistinguishable. That night, an explosion ripped through the transport van carrying him to federal custody. The news called it an ambush. The city called it vengeance. No bodies were found. Only smoke and questions. Mateo watched the footage in silence, a rare flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Find him, he ordered. Alive or dead. Amara saw the same report from her apartment. The screen flickered with flames, the headlines screaming his name. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, whispering, "Please tell me you're still breathing." Outside, sirens wailed again, the sound merging with rain until it was impossible to tell where the storm ended and grief began. And somewhere in that chaos, between truth and loss, one question lingered in both their hearts: whether love built on ruin could survive the cost of honesty. The smoke curled upward from the burning transport van, staining the night with the scent of gasoline and grief. The sirens were still distant, their red lights flickering off the wet asphalt like blood swirling through water. Out of the wreckage, a figure dragged himself forward, coughing, one hand clutching the side of his ribs. Lorenzo De Luca's breath came in gasps, every inhale a reminder that he wasn't supposed to still be alive. Shards of glass glittered along his sleeve, his once white shirt soaked through with rain and soot. Somewhere behind him, someone screamed his name, but it faded under the thunder. He pushed himself to his feet and looked toward Mulberry Street. In the far distance, through the storm haze, he could see the dim outline of Café Vitali, the place that had given him a name outside blood, and now the only place left to die or begin again. He stumbled forward, shoes scraping the pavement, the world reduced to pain and the sound of his heartbeat. Inside the cafe, Don Mateo waited. The old man stood behind the counter, where his son had once served espresso with the precision of confession. His suit was immaculate, his hands steady, a revolver resting beside the register like a final signature. Around him, the remnants of his empire lingered in silence. 2 guards by the door, another near the window. The storm outside rattled the glass, but Mateo's gaze stayed fixed on the street. "He'll come," he said quietly. "He's too much like me not to." His lieutenant shifted nervously. "And if he doesn't?" Mateo's expression hardened. "Then the fire did what I couldn't." The door creaked, and for a moment no one breathed. Then Lorenzo appeared in the doorway, a silhouette against lightning, soaked and bleeding, eyes calm in a way that frightened even his father. "I'm here," he said, his voice low, rough. "Just like you wanted." Amara was still blocks away when she heard the first gunshot. She had followed the smoke, the flashing lights, the chaos of sirens that all seemed to lead her back to one place. She ran through the rain until her lungs burned, every step heavier than the last. When she turned the corner onto Mulberry, she froze. The cafe's front window was shattered, neon letters flickering against the downpour. For a moment, she thought she saw him through the glass, a figure standing, then falling, and she screamed his name before realizing her voice was swallowed by thunder. She pushed through the door, the smell of gunpowder mixing with espresso and rain. Lorenzo had dropped behind a table, a gun in his hand, blood streaking down his arm. One of Mateo's guards lay motionless near the counter. The other crawled toward the door before collapsing. Mateo himself stood calm, unflinching, as his son raised the weapon again. "It ends here," Lorenzo said.
No, figlio mio, Matteo replied evenly.
"It ends when you stop pretending you can be anything other than what I made you." Lorenzo's finger trembled on the trigger. "You made a killer. I became a man in spite of it." Mateo's smile was small and cruel. "A man who betrays his blood for a woman who doesn't even bear his name? A woman who reminds me I still have a soul," Lorenzo said. "And that's what terrifies you, Padre. You've spent your life trying to bury yours." Mateo stepped forward slowly, the muzzle of his gun leveled at his son's chest. "I built everything with these hands. I carried your mother's coffin, buried my brother's, and you think love erases that? You think she'll save you?" Lorenzo's reply came through clenched teeth.
No.
but she made me want to save myself. Amara crouched behind the doorframe, shaking. She could hear them, father and son, words cutting sharper than bullets. She wanted to scream for them to stop, but her voice wouldn't come. Another shot cracked the air, shattering a lamp. Sparks danced across the floor. Lorenzo ducked, fired back, the recoil jolting through his body. Matteo staggered, but didn't fall. "You won't kill me," he said, almost laughing. "You've always wanted my approval too badly." Lorenzo's hand shook. "You're right," he said softly, lowering the gun for a heartbeat, and in that pause, Matteo fired. The bullet caught Lorenzo in the shoulder, spinning him backward. He hit the floor hard, blood blooming through his shirt. Amara screamed and ran forward, sliding across the wet tiles to reach him. Matteo's eyes widened when he saw her. "So this is her," he said coldly. "The reason you betrayed your family." She looked up, trembling, eyes filled with both fear and fury. "He betrayed you because you killed what was human in him." Matteo pointed the gun toward her. "Then let's finish what I started." Lorenzo moved before he thought, before pain could stop him. He fired once, twice. The first shot shattered the counter glass. The second found Matteo's chest. The old man staggered, surprise flickering across his face as blood spread down his tie. He tried to raise the gun again, but his strength failed him. He sank slowly to the floor, leaning against the counter where decades of sin had been poured like coffee. Lorenzo crawled to him, breath shallow. Matteo's hand twitched, reaching toward his son's face. "You're still my blood," he whispered. Lorenzo nodded faintly. "And you're still my curse." Matteo's eyes glazed over, his last breath leaving like steam from a cooling cup. For a long moment, the world went still. No thunder, no sirens, only the hum of the flickering neon sign outside. Amara pressed her hands against Lorenzo's wound, her fingers slipping through the blood. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Please, just stay." He smiled faintly, pain carving lines into his face. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be bleeding," she said. "Guess we both made bad decisions." He tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. "Look at me," she pleaded. "You're going to make it." His eyes found hers, calm despite everything. "If I don't, tell the world I tried to be better." "Don't talk like that. Then tell me something worth staying for." She leaned close, tears mixing with rain on his cheek. "I love you, Lorenzo. That's all I have left." His lips curved, faint but real. "That's everything." Outside, police sirens grew louder. Amara glanced toward the window. "We have to get you out," she said. "They'll arrest you." "Let them," he murmured. "At least it'll be quiet there."
No.
"You can't give up now." "I'm not giving up," he said softly. "I'm just tired." She gripped his hand tighter. "Then let me be tired with you." He closed his eyes briefly, the corner of his mouth lifting. "You're too good for this place." "And you were always too good at pretending you weren't," she replied. He tried to stand, and she helped him, her shoulder under his arm. They moved toward the door, each step slower than the last. The rain outside reflected in the broken glass, light trembling like hope trying to survive. As they reached the doorway, Lorenzo stopped. "Wait," he whispered. He turned back toward his father's body, staring at it for a long, silent moment. "All my life I thought power would keep me safe," he said. "But love made me understand what safety actually means." Amara touched his arm. "Then let's leave before they take that from you again." He nodded once, then collapsed, his knees giving way. She caught him before he hit the floor, his weight folding into her arms. No, stay with me," she cried. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Amara," he whispered, barely audible. "You were the only thing I didn't want to own. I just wanted to deserve." His head dropped against her shoulder, his breathing shallow but steady. For a moment, she thought he was gone. Then she felt the faint rise of his chest against hers. Relief crashed through her like light through glass. "You're still here," she breathed. "You hear me? You're still here." The police burst through the doorway, guns raised, shouts echoing through the storm. Amara shielded him instinctively.
He needs help, she cried.
The nearest officer hesitated before calling for a medic. Paramedics pushed in moments later, kneeling beside them, checking his pulse. He's alive, one said. Barely. They lifted him onto a stretcher, rain pelting his face as they carried him out. Amara followed until they stopped her at the threshold. Ma'am, you can't come. She fought against their hands. Please, he doesn't have anyone else. The officer shook his head. He's under protective custody. He saved me, she whispered. He saved us all. But her voice was lost under the sirens as the ambulance doors slammed shut. Hours later, as dawn bled into the skyline, Café Vitali stood silent. The floor was soaked, the smell of smoke and rain heavy in the air. On the counter, 2 cups still sat untouched, one cracked down the middle. Amara stood outside behind the yellow tape, watching as investigators moved through the wreckage. Someone placed Mateo's body on a stretcher, covered it with a white sheet, and wheeled it past her. She didn't flinch. Instead, she looked toward the ambulance idling at the end of the street, hoping for a sign. For a second, she thought she saw movement inside, a hand against the glass, but then the vehicle pulled away into the mist. She whispered after it, "Come back to me." The wind carried her words away. By the time the sun broke through the clouds, the street was empty. The neon sign flickered once more before dying completely. The rain had stopped, leaving only the faint scent of coffee and gunpowder, the perfume of endings. And from somewhere beyond the city, where sirens faded and sea met skyline, a single phrase lingered in the narrator's voice. Sometimes redemption doesn't come from surviving the fire, but from walking through it for someone else. Before you continue the story, take a breath. Like, subscribe, and share if you felt every heartbeat of this night. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you've made it this far, type "I'm still here." Let's see who's still watching when the storm clears. The sirens had faded hours ago, leaving only the echo of rainwater sliding off awnings and the quiet drip from the broken neon sign that once read Café Vitali. Amara stood behind the police line until the sky turned gray, watching workers sweep up glass and gather shell casings. Every sound felt distant, as if she were underwater. When the officer finally approached her with a clipboard and a tired expression, she already knew what he was going to say. He didn't make it, he told her, voice low, rehearsed, the kind reserved for next of kin. She nodded, unable to feel her own face. Are you sure? He hesitated, glancing down at the report. They found a body burned beyond recognition near the crash site. It matches his description. She whispered, then it's done, though part of her brain refused to attach meaning to the words. He offered condolences, but she was already walking away, each step carrying her further from the life she'd barely begun. She rented a small apartment above a laundromat in Brooklyn, where the constant hum of machines filled the silence he'd left behind. Days blended into one another. Work, home, sleep, repeat. People at the hospital called her strong, but strength, she learned, was just another word for someone who kept moving, because stopping would hurt too much. Sometimes she caught herself turning at the sound of the door, expecting him to be there with that quiet, steady gaze, the one that saw through her even when she wished it wouldn't. Instead, there was only the wind pushing through the hallway, carrying the faint smell of detergent and city rain. On her dresser sat a chipped espresso cup she'd taken from the cafe before it was boarded up. Every morning, she'd set it down beside her bed, fill it with black coffee, and whisper a single word to the air, "Why?" never expecting an answer. Meanwhile, somewhere far from New York, Lorenzo De Luca woke to the steady beep of a heart monitor and the sterile glow of hospital lights. His shoulder was bandaged, his body bruised, his mind fractured between what was memory and what was dream. The agent sitting beside his bed introduced himself, without looking up from the file in his hands. Federal Witness Protection, Mr. De Luca. Congratulations, you're officially dead. Lorenzo stared at him, lips dry. And my father? The agent closed the folder. Also dead. Which means you just inherited ghosts instead of an empire. Lorenzo tried to sit up, but pain shot through his chest. What happens now? Now, the agent said, you disappear. He handed him a small envelope. New identity, new address, new birth date. Your past ends tonight. Lorenzo held the envelope without opening it. And the woman? The agent's expression softened briefly. She believes you're gone. Best thing for both of you. But when the door closed and the room fell quiet, Lorenzo opened the envelope and stared at the name printed inside. Leo Vittor. It felt foreign on his tongue. He whispered his real one once more, like a prayer he wasn't ready to abandon. Weeks turned to months. Lorenzo recovered in silence, his new life unfolding in a coastal town where no one knew his history. He opened a small cafe near the water, simple, unmarked, serving fishermen at dawn and tourists by noon. Yet every time he poured a cup, his mind wandered back to Café Vitali, to the woman whose laughter had once filled the space between his sins. Sometimes he wrote letters he never mailed, lines beginning with "I'm still alive" and ending with "I'm sorry I left before I could tell you goodbye." He kept them in a drawer beneath the register, a secret confession hidden under cash and coffee beans. At night, he'd close the shop, walk along the pier, and imagine her somewhere under the same moon, healing in ways he couldn't see. He told himself that was enough. It never was. Amara spent those same months rebuilding something of her own. The payout from the hospital and a quiet donation that arrived under a name she didn't recognize allowed her to open a small health clinic in Brooklyn, Vida Nuova, New Life. The irony wasn't lost on her. The space was bright, filled with sunlight and children's laughter, the opposite of the shadows she'd once lived among. Yet some nights, when the patients had gone and the lights dimmed, she'd find herself sitting in the break room with that same chipped espresso cup, tracing the crack down its side. A colleague once asked if it had sentimental value. She smiled faintly. "It's a reminder," she said, "of what happens when you pour too much into something that can't hold it." But deep down, she didn't believe that. She still felt his presence in small things, the way a man's voice echoed in a hallway, the scent of roasted beans drifting from a nearby cafe, the memory of a promise whispered between breaths. "You are the only thing I didn't want to own. I just wanted to deserve." One rainy morning almost a year later, she opened the clinic early. The city was quiet, the streets washed clean. As she reached for the door, she noticed something unusual on the counter. A paper cup, still warm, her favorite order written on it in a familiar hand. No one else had keys to the building. She looked around, heart racing, but the lobby was empty. Inside the cup was a small folded note. She hesitated, then unfolded it. 2 words, written in precise handwriting, for her. She froze, her throat tightening. Logic tried to intervene. It could be coincidence, a kind gesture from a delivery worker, but her body knew before her mind could argue. She whispered his name to the empty room, half fear, half hope. Lorenzo. Across the city, in a quiet apartment above a new coffee shop, a man watched the rain through the window. His hair was shorter, his scars lighter, but his eyes carried the same weight. On the table beside him sat a radio tuned low to a local news station. The announcer mentioned the opening of a community clinic in Brooklyn, praising its founder, Amara Bennett, for her dedication to underserved families. Lorenzo closed his eyes, listening to her name as if it were a song. He picked up another paper cup, wrote the same 2 words on its side, and smiled faintly. "It's enough to know she's okay," he murmured. Yet the next morning, before dawn, he walked the distance to Brooklyn, left the cup on her counter, and disappeared again into the rain. Days passed. The cups kept appearing, sometimes at the clinic, sometimes outside her apartment door. Always the same handwriting. Always the same message. People around her started noticing. Secret admirer? A nurse joked. Amara only smiled. Something like that. But every new cup pulled at a thread inside her that wouldn't let go. She started writing back, small notes left where the cups appeared. "If you're real, tell me why you left. If you're gone, let me stop waiting." For weeks, there was no reply. Then, one morning, she found a letter instead of a cup. Her hands shook as she opened it. "I left because love can't live under the weight of blood. But I never stopped drinking coffee for 2." She wept quietly, Not out of sadness, but out of something deeper. Understanding. He was alive. And that meant she could finally forgive, not because he asked her to, but because she needed to. That night, she closed the clinic early, walked down to the waterfront, and sat on a bench overlooking the city lights. The air smelled of salt and rain, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. "You're still out there," she whispered. "And maybe that's enough." In another part of the city, Lorenzo stood in his cafe as the last customer left. He locked the door, turned off the lights, and poured 2 cups of coffee. He set one across from him at the counter, steam curling upward. "For her," he said softly. Then he took a sip of his own and smiled. He didn't need to see her again to know she was alive. The world was finally quiet, the way it had never been when he'd chased power. Outside, dawn began to break, streaking the glass with gold. He whispered to the light, "Maybe someday, when it's safe, she'll walk in again. And if she does, I'll still be here." He glanced at the empty chair, then at the door. Until then, this is enough. Morning came to Brooklyn, sunlight touching the windows of Vida Nuova. Amara unlocked the door, stepped inside, and stopped. On the counter sat a new cup, this one made of porcelain, the same style once used at Café Vitale. Inside was fresh coffee, still hot. Underneath it, a note folded in 3. She opened it carefully, afraid the moment would vanish if she blinked. "Some debts can't be paid with money or revenge. Only with change. You gave me that. I'm free because of you." There was no signature, only the faint smell of espresso and the memory of rain. She stood there for a long time, smiling through tears. Somewhere in the city, a man with the same handwriting walked away from another cafe, disappearing into the morning crowd. Neither looked back. They didn't have to. Love, after all, wasn't about possession or reunion. It was about the quiet knowledge that somewhere, someone you once saved is still breathing because you dared to care. Years passed, yet New York never forgot how to whisper. The rain still fell on Mulberry Street the same way it always had, gentle at first, then heavy enough to blur memories. But the cafe at the corner of the block was no longer Café Vitale. The old sign had been taken down, the bullet holes patched, the walls painted a color that looked like forgiveness. Still, if you stood there long enough, you could smell the faint ghost of roasted beans and something else, love, maybe, or what's left of it when the noise fades. Lorenzo De Luca had been gone a long time. Officially, he was buried under a false name, a casualty of a fire no one cared to investigate. Unofficially, he had become the kind of story that baristas told new hires late at night, how the man who owned this cafe once burned down his own empire for a woman who used to sit by the window with a journal and a soft smile. Most customers didn't believe it, but the few who did always lowered their voices when they said his name. Lorenzo, like a prayer or a warning. Across town, Amara Bennett still opened Café Vida Nuova every morning at 6. She never changed the routine. Lights on, grind beans, heat milk, wipe counters, unlock doors. Rituals were the way she kept ghosts in their place. The clinic had grown since that first year. Children now played in the waiting room, and people who couldn't afford care found it here without question. The world had taken almost everything from her, yet somehow she'd rebuilt it piece by piece. Still, every morning, before the first patient arrived, she placed a porcelain cup on the counter and poured one serving she never drank. Steam rose, soft and slow, curling upward like the memory of a voice that once said, "Bring her to me." It was silly, she told herself, some habits just don't die. But deep down she knew what it was. It was hope wearing the disguise of superstition. One afternoon, she found herself on Mulberry Street again. It wasn't planned. She'd taken a wrong turn after a home visit and ended up staring at the cafe that had once changed her life. The new sign read Casa Luz, House of Light. Funny, she thought, how the universe keeps renaming the same pain until it looks like healing. Through the glass, she saw an older man cleaning tables, humming softly. Something about the way he moved caught her off guard. Methodical, careful, like someone who measured the world one gesture at a time. She pushed the door open. the bell chimed. The man turned, smiled politely, and asked, "What can I get you?" For a heartbeat, time forgot how to move. His hair was grayer now, his face thinner, but those eyes, those steady, patient eyes, they were the same. "Lorenzo?" she whispered, barely sound at all. He froze. The cloth in his hand fell to the floor. For a long second, neither spoke. Then, quietly, he said, "You found me." Her knees nearly gave out. "I wasn't looking." He nodded, half smile, half confession. "Maybe that's why you did." They sat in their old spots, her by the window, him behind the counter. Neither asked the questions that screamed beneath the surface. The silence between them had matured. It no longer demanded to be filled, only understood. Finally, she said, "I thought you died." He looked down at his hands. "I did, just not all the way." She exhaled shakily. "Why disappear?" He met her gaze. "Because if I stayed, you'd spend the rest of your life running from what my name meant. You deserve to breathe again." Her voice softened. "And you? Did you ever breathe?" He smiled faintly. "Every time I wrote your name on a cup." Tears threatened, but she blinked them away. "You sent them." He nodded once. "I couldn't let you forget that love didn't die in that fire." They talked until the sky turned amber, sharing the spaces life had built between them. She told him about the clinic, the kids, the nights she almost gave up. He told her about the years under new names, how anonymity felt both safe and suffocating, how every cup he poured was both penance and prayer. He admitted he still heard his father's voice sometimes, a ghost reminding him that mercy had cost the family its crown. She reached across the counter, her hand covering his. "You broke the curse," she said. "No," he whispered, "we did." Silence followed, the kind that feels like completion. Outside, the rain began again, soft and steady. When she stood to leave, he walked her to the door. "I don't know if I'll ever be free enough to be the man you needed," he said quietly. She turned to face him, eyes kind. "You already were. Just too late to notice." He nodded, acceptance flickering like a candle about to go out. "Then let this be enough." She smiled sadly. "It is." They stood in the doorway as thunder rolled across the city, and for a moment, the light caught them both, two souls that had burned everything to find peace in the ashes. She stepped into the rain, and he didn't stop her. Love, he realized, wasn't about keeping. It was about letting the right one walk away knowing they'd changed you forever. That night, after closing, Lorenzo walked through the empty cafe, turning off lights one by one. He paused by the table where she had sat years ago, where it had all begun. On it, he placed a single cup of coffee and whispered, "For her." Then he sat across from it, hands folded, eyes distant. He spoke softly, as if she could still hear. "I learned that love doesn't erase the darkness. It only teaches you how to hold it without letting it own you." The city hummed beyond the glass, alive, indifferent, eternal. He smiled faintly. Somewhere he hoped she was smiling too. Months later, a letter arrived at Café Vida Nuova. No return address. Inside was a photograph, the cafe on Mulberry Street, taken from outside at dawn. Through the glass, a figure could be seen cleaning tables, head bowed, light spilling around him. On the back, a short message, "You were right." It was enough. Amara placed the photo in a frame beside the counter, beneath a quote she'd written years before. Some stories don't end. They just learn how to live differently. And so the city kept breathing. The cafe kept serving. People came and went, unaware that every cup carried the weight of a promise made long ago. Love had not saved them. It had revealed them. And maybe that was the point all along.
Before you go, take a breath.
If this story reached you, if it made you feel something, subscribe and share it with someone who still believes that even in a world built on power and regret, love can still change a life. Wherever you're watching from, tell me in the comments below. And if you've stayed until the end, write "I'm still here." Because sometimes being here, still feeling, still believing is the bravest thing we can do.